to take a chance and share about a teacher or yourself, some of the amazing growth or celebration, adaptation, innovation that happened this year, either in virtual, hybrid, small group, SPED in the red, all of the amazing things that you did today. So please share with us yourself or some colleagues that have actually moved the mountains this year. And so tweet us at APS_TLN or grab this QR code and share a story of success. We really do want to highlight and celebrate with both TLFs and teachers this year. We have some big plans coming, so we would love to hear some of those stories of success, and thank you for doing that. So to get started today, we're going to talk elementary hybrid learning. This is a research project, if you would, that our team has taken on since early in the fall, coming up with ideas from around the nation, around the country, really around the world about what's happening in schools. Some schools have been doing this for a lot longer than others. And we just want to be able to support teachers as they move into, yet again, another type of teaching that could be happening in their classrooms. This could be small groups, this could be hybrid, or this could even just give ideas for current virtual teaching. And so we want to share with you that idea that these are strategies that we've found from our research, and hopefully they can make an impact for you, your school, or your teacher. So grab the note taker, which is in the slides as well as in the chat to help you out with that. Know that this presentation will be available for all teachers throughout the district multiple times next week, and that schedule is also in this presentation. If any additional teachers that you know of would like to attend, please share that with them. And again, thank you for being here with us today. So to kind of start off with some norms for this, of course, mute yourselves. Cameras are definitely optional. This is possibly your lunch break, so feel free to multitask, which teachers do best. Set your intentions and know that we are trying some new things today. So hopefully you can give us feedback to make this the most relevant learning opportunity for teachers around the district. Ask questions for understanding. We do have people monitoring our chat as well as the parking lot within the note taker. So choose a platform that works best for you and share any questions. If you have the question, I'm sure somebody else around the district has the same question, and we want to make this as easily of a bridge as we possibly can. So please make sure to share any question, no matter how big or small with us. We are appreciating your feedback. And knowing that this is also our first presentation of many, we would appreciate any feedback that we can add clarity to this presentation to really help us moving forward in the future. Also, if this is something that you need more support on, your school needs more support on, your grade level, specific teachers at your school site, please reach out to us. We are more than happy to support this work at your school site through a conversation, a presentation, or even just working with teachers as they transition into this. So please make sure to reach out to us. The sign-in in the note taker is not necessary. We do have your attendance for attending this meeting today, so do not worry about the sign-in. That's really for next week when we're reaching a larger audience. So today, let's start off with some useful links. Again, these are all in the note taker, but also in the slides. So grab any of these things that might be helpful for you. As TLFs and administrators, we know that this might be the first step in sharing these ideas with others. So we did add as many resources to help you in your facilitation as well. So grab those ideas as you need them. A little bit about what we're going to go through today with both the agenda as well as today's purpose. Today, we want to share with you what we found to be the 4 possible models to use in hybrid teaching, thinking students at home and students in front of you, and what will this look like. These can also be strategies that your teachers start to incorporate into their virtual teaching to make it seamless. We also want to give some examples of what this could look like in real time, and possible next steps in thinking or planning as teachers are moving. We want to really build off of what's happening in classrooms. We do not want any teacher to stop, whether that's successful strategies or the way that they've been working with their students, and try something new. We want to build. And so take into consideration all of the tools and strategies that have been working, all of the ways that you've been finding ways to connect with students and families, and choose one of these models that might best help build that with you. And again, some of these ideas might be a combination, and we recognize that as well. So also today we are only going to focus on what we can control. We know that there are a lot of things happening in schools right now that we can't control within the district, within the state. But what we can control as teachers is the instruction happening within our classrooms. And so really the ideas we're sharing today really do focus on the instructional piece. The part from teacher to student is what we're sharing with you today. And I know those other things are weighing on you as well, but unfortunately, what you have no control over, we have even less control over. And so we just want to support and make the teaching and the instruction the best that it can possibly be for both you and for your students. So consider that as we move forward as well. The first thing that we want to share with you is that you do have a lot of choice. We know that this transition times and this year has probably felt very confusing and stressful, but there is still a lot of pieces where you do have choice, especially in hybrid learning. Thinking about what curriculum you choose to use and how you implement those ideas with your students, which digital tools work best for your learners, and the things that you know best in your own teaching, how you function in small groups, and what that could look like in your classroom. We do have a ton of behavior supports available for you, either from the district at the school site, systems and routines, things that can be added into your virtual teaching, and then also implemented into hybrid learning as well, and starting to prepare that communication with students and families as the transition does happen. Those things are within your control, and the choice is yours for how you handle those. And so hopefully some of these ideas that we share today will help make that seamless and give you some ideas as well. The idea that we're going to share today is starting with what's going well. I know I mentioned this earlier, but we really do want to build off of what's going well. So we do have a Padlet, if those of you interested in sharing some ideas. It's also some accountability, right? We write it down, we know it's real. So what is going well? Share some ideas on our Padlet. Within the note taker, you'll find that link. What's going well? Those are the things we want to build off of. Those are the things that we want to lay as the foundation as we start to move into hybrid. We don't want to get rid of any of the ideas that are going well. So share ideas that might also spark an idea for those who also have the opportunity to read that. The other idea that we're going to talk about today is what's been challenging in distance learning. What are structures or routines? What are learning opportunities that we need still to make those challenges a little bit less prominent in hybrid learning? So what are those things that our team can possibly develop for you or share resources with? Others around the district can help with what's been challenging for you. And so share those ideas on the Padlet. If you don't want to join into the Padlet, feel free to share both of those ideas in the chat with us as well. We would love to learn with you that way as well. So just another opportunity. If the Padlet doesn't work, feel free to just jump on in and add those ideas into the chat for us. Now that we've kind of thought about what's going well, what's been challenging, let's start to build some ideas around where what this might look like in our classrooms. And the first thing we want to do is recognize that from March until now, oh my gosh, the amazing things that has happened for teachers and schools and students, and you were able to pick up and switch. And so those skills that you learned in that past year are really the skills that we're going to continue to empower and build on as we move forward. So thinking about thinking about those ideas, these research ideas that we have and these examples come from that place of where we've switched from and how we're going to continue to build. So we are not asking anybody to stop what's been working or to change their direction, but to build in even a little bit more capacity. And we're here to help all along the way. So I'm going to pass it off to my first colleague today to share a couple of those ideas and strategies with you. And again, questions in the chat, reach out if ever we can help. And again, thank you for being here.
So just real quick before we go into the first schedule, note that these reflection questions are all available in your note taker. You can just add to them as we go through, return to them often throughout, because your ideas might change as we talk about the different schedules. We also have a page here on definitions. So if you are confused about any of the terms that we're using, please refer back to this page.
And Rachel, could you pull up the note taker really fast? I think it'll be a really helpful tool before we dive into our models. Thank you. All right, so the note taker is designed so that you can really, as we're analyzing these 4 models, hone in on the model that is best for you, for your colleagues, whoever you are making recommendations for based on this note taker. Think of a specific classroom. And if you'll scroll down, thank you. We have our reflection questions that were posed at the beginning, and then there are also spaces where you can tally for each of the models. And so this little 4 square will be really helpful for writing down some pros and cons for each model. So I encourage you, that's page 3. Is that right, Rachel? Yes, okay, so page 3, if that's how you'd like to take notes. And then we'll dive into the 4 models. I appreciate that, Rachel. Okay, so I'm going to share with you 2 models, synchronous and semi-synchronous for hybrid learning. And my colleague Maggie is going to follow up with 2 more models. She's going to share with you flipped and station rotation. As we share these 4 models, you really want to think about how they would work with each of your own group of students in for your own classroom. And the note taker is a really great tool for that. So we're going to begin with the synchronous model. So in synchronous instruction, and we're very familiar with this term at this point, we hear it a lot, but it essentially means delivering instructions simultaneously for all students, in person, on campus, virtually, and at home. So when we use the term synchronous, it means that we are doing the same thing at the same time. And all instruction is happening at the same time. There is an emphasis on whole group. It requires live streaming, so that's something to take into consideration. And on our schedule on the next slide, we have an example of what this would look like. So there is an emphasis throughout the schedule on whole group instruction. You may be able to build in opportunities for independent work, but it would follow a very similar structure of whole group instruction all together. My students who are at home are watching a live stream of me delivering instruction to the students that are in front of me. And those students may even be plugged into a device as well. Like you may want all your students watching you through the same device, like through that same stream. That's going to be something in your control, your realm. And you may say, we're going to break for whole group independent practice. But again, the emphasis is on we are doing the same things at the same time, thus the synchronous element. And so in this example, you would have morning meeting with your whole group, all students. You would then transition to your ELA block, where you may have your reading mini lesson, which is whole group. You may have some lesson practice, which is your whole group, but whole group independent, followed up with your reading mini lesson, whole group again, and then your lesson practice. And so you can break your day down into smaller chunks where everyone is doing the same thing at the same time. You would follow that same structure for math, where you have your lesson, independent practice, and maybe you're playing the same game. And this could be everyone is doing the same game at the same time, but it could be a hands-on game. It doesn't necessarily have to rely completely on technology. You would have your lunch where your students would eat, and then intervention enrichment would still look like small group, and that's where you would have more flexibility within a synchronous model. Some synchronous models aren't able to achieve that small group time, so it really depends on, again, you and your classroom. And it's what we're keeping in consideration this whole time. So some things to keep in mind for synchronous model benefits and considerations. Students receive the same instruction at the same time. So like the amount of differentiation is something to then consider, right? Students have the opportunity to receive immediate feedback in a synchronous model because you're all together. The opportunity for collaboration between students in person and students at home. They could be on this, like everyone's doing the same thing at the same time, but I am talking to my friend in my who's at home, but we are doing the same activity at the same time. And this could potentially simplify your planning. Some considerations are, how will you address tech issues? If you have a very strict schedule of what happens when, and you have technology issues either in the classroom or at home, that's something to consider. How will you address behavioral problems in person? Planning extended work for students who finish early. How are we going to make sure we're all on the same schedule? How will you teach routines and expectations? And what materials, tools will virtual learners need in this model? So just like you might consider a synchronous model, this might be the model for you. If you don't like to record lessons or videos, you wouldn't have to in this particular model. Students struggle completing work on their own. If your students struggle, this might be the model for you. You are able to send home materials and tools for students to use at home so that they can do the same activity with you when you're doing it in the classroom. If you prioritize your whole group instruction, if you are looking for more consistent instructional delivery, my students have a very predictable schedule of what will happen when. And if you are comfortable using multiple technology tools, this could potentially be your model. So that's synchronous, the model, and I'm going to pause for a moment to give you a chance to take any notes you need on synchronous before we move on to semi-synchronous. All right, so moving on to a semi-synchronous model. In a semi-synchronous model, it is similar to synchronous, but with a few tweaks. There's a little bit more flexibility. And so if synchronous is something that you almost do right now, maybe you're looking for a little bit more flexibility, semi-synchronous could be that fix for you. It's a mix of synchronous and asynchronous learning time. This model utilizes a blend of live teaching and independent work, provides a flexible learning environment for both in-person and at-home students. It provides space for flow between synchronous back to asynchronous activities. It has more of a flow to it. Students meet for the lesson and then break into independent or small group work that is the same at home and in the classroom. And students will rejoin as a whole group at a specific time. So this is where you'd really want to have a schedule students are able to navigate. And looking at a sample schedule, you'll see that it looks very similar to synchronous with a couple of tweaks. Rather than going from whole group to our asynchronous, like our independent whole group work, this is where we have a flexibility to have some asynchronous tasks and small group. We're still starting our day with morning meeting all together. And then you would move into your mini lesson, but this is where you could provide more opportunities for individualized instruction through guided reading in your small group work. But your students would know to come back. So this is at 8:20. Your students would know after this lesson ends at 8:30 that this is their time, 20 minutes to accomplish the tasks that you give them, and so you can meet with your small group. At 9 o'clock, your students are going to come all back together for their phonics word study. So your students who are at home have to be able to keep track of that time, whether that's setting timers or other scaffolds you can provide for them where they can go do their work and then know to come back. So it's, I'm releasing you for a period and we're coming back, releasing you again and coming back. And that's where this semi-synchronous terminology comes in. And so looking at our math block, it would follow a very similar structure. We have our whole group together. We're going to break for 2 small group activities. So my students need to know to go from their independent work to their online lessons for my in-person students and my at-home students. So they're going to have to know to go between the two of them. And maybe that's where you can provide flexibility. Maybe your independent work doesn't take as long for one student and they can then move on to their online lessons, or maybe it's the reverse. And so there is more flexibility in a model like this. And after lunch, we would have our teacher-led groups and our online lessons. So semi-synchronous, we are working on the same sorts of activities at the same time, but with more flexibility. And this might be the model for you, this looking at benefits and considerations. It's the benefits that outweigh your considerations in this case. So students receive the same amount of instruction at the same time, similar to the synchronous model. There's an opportunity for collaboration between students in person and students at home, simplified planning, and includes off-screen asynchronous time for when you're doing small groups. Some considerations are, again, how will you address technology issues? How will you address behavioral issues in person? When planning is extended work for your students who do finish early? What materials, tools will your virtual learners need at home? And what accountability measures will you include for your asynchronous work? And looking at this might be the model for you if your students have supported home so they can navigate that schedule. Your students have the capacity to work independently for those 20-minute blocks. You are able to send home materials and tools for the students to use so that they can do the same activity that your students in person are doing. If you don't like to record your lessons or video, this could be your model. And you are looking for more consistent instructional delivery, and you need time to meet personally with struggling students in small groups. And I'm going to give you a moment to take down any notes you need on semi-synchronous before Maggie shares with you the flipped model.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Kathy. So we're going to talk about two other models that you could possibly engage in. And this first one that we're looking here on the screen is the flipped model. And so when you're engaged in a flipped model, most of the work that the students are doing actually takes place in the classroom together collaboratively, and when they're outside of the classroom, that's when they're kind of receiving that explicit instruction via video, and they're also working on some of their independent work outside of the classroom as well. And so if you look at that image that's on the screen there, you can kind of see that flow where the students are engaged in learning about the concept, they come together and they collaborate in class and they go deeper with the content, and then afterwards they engage in their independent work, whether at home or possibly with a little bit of time in the classroom. And so a lot of that work is taking place in that space, really going deeper with that knowledge. And one of the nice things about flipped classrooms is that there's a lot of resources and research on it already. And so, for example, some of the links here that are listed, these are just a couple of resources that have already been done about flipped classrooms. From the University of Berkeley, there's several videos on how flipped classroom works in elementary and secondary settings. And there are several books out there as well that help kind of facilitate your work on flipped classroom. Now, some example schedules that we have, if we could go to the next slide, please, is potentially a scenario like this. So this is one way that you could engage in that work, is that when you're in person, you're still having that morning meeting with all of your students together, but then you're really engaging in that deep collaborative work with your students in reading, with comprehension, with word work, and writing together in those collaborative spaces, where the students have already watched a video at home, like what the virtual students are doing, and then they're engaging in that collaborative spaces together. Now, another example with math, which is on the next slide here, also shows how that can kind of work in a math sense as well, where there is a focus lesson with the students in the classroom, and then there's a recorded lesson with the students at home. And each group is engaging in that deep collaborative practice in the classroom, whereas on their own, they are doing more of that independent work at home. And so there are a couple of, oh, my apologies. If you go to the next slide, you'll see kind of how those math centers might work. And so some of those ideas that they may have for those, for the spaces inside and at home of the classroom, ST Math, iReady, some of the collaborative activities that they already have in Stepping Stones, a lot of those are potential ideas that you could use either for that asynchronous independent work or for that collaborative practice inside of the classroom. And that's the thing that we really want to emphasize with that flipped model, is that when you're in the classroom, this is the opportunity for in-depth work, for collaboration, for further discussion, and for inquiry. And that's one of the real benefits of this model. Now, considering some of these components, one of those major benefits, like we've focused on before, is that collaborative application. You're really, really focusing on taking the content not broader, but deeper. And so that's one of those really good components about this. Now, some considerations you would definitely have to have is that the holidays and vacations could impact how you're planning for those AB groups. And so some very intentional planning would have to happen in terms of who's getting what instruction when, and how does that balance out for you. And so you would also need to create an accountability system for those students that do not complete their asynchronous work ahead of classroom time. How are we going to create those spaces where learning is still happening? And then, of course, we also want to consider the social distancing measures. So if students have to be 6 feet apart, what does that look like for collaboration? And so those are some things that you'll definitely need to consider, but there is a lot of practices and a lot of research around flipped models. So this is not anything brand new. This is something that has actually been in process with elementary and secondary classrooms for a long time. And so if we go to the next slide, these are some of the reasons why you might consider a flipped model. If you're comfortable recording your own videos, if you've really gotten to know Zoom and, I'm sorry, not Zoom, Loom, if you've gotten to know Loom or Screencastify or any of those other recording devices well to develop strong instructional videos, a flipped model could be really good for you. If you have been working a lot on building independent student capacity, like some of our lovely ladies have presented on earlier today, this would be a good model for you as well. And then additionally, with some of the other components that are on here, these are some of the things that if you're comfortable with this, then flipped model would be a good option for you, especially as we're going deeper with the content, not necessarily broader. And so the final model that we're going to talk about today is the station rotation model. Now, station rotation is kind of a little bit of a mix of everything. You've got structures from Math Workshop, Daily 5. You're essentially setting up your students in these rotations with learning activities throughout the entire day. And within those stations, you have a teacher-led station, you may have some online stations, and you may have some offline stations as well. And part of the work that the students are engaging in is that time with you there in the classroom, but also being able to interact with each other through possibly an online station or working independently on an offline station. Now, this is also another model that is not necessarily brand new. There's actually a lot of research around station rotation as well. Edutopia has talked about that in some of their articles, and there are several videos out there that talk about how station rotation and differentiating instruction works in classrooms. Now, most of these do show students inside the classrooms for that station rotation, but there is a researcher named Catlin Tucker, and her work is specifically on station rotation models and how to make them work in hybrid and blended learning. So if we go to the next slide, you can see an example of a potential schedule that you could do at the elementary level. And so when you have students that are here in person, you may want to break them up into these small groups where one group is engaging in an independent offline activity, and you're working with a couple of students in a teacher-led center. Whereas the students at home may be engaged in their own online work as well. And then you would rotate through those stations, ensuring that at some point during each of your blocks, every single child gets an opportunity to meet with you. And so this is something that could work really well, especially if your students are more comfortable working in those small group settings. And this would also give you an opportunity as a teacher to really see and develop that relationship with your students and progress monitor their growth continuously. So some of these benefits and considerations is that if you really prioritize differentiated instruction, this would be a great benefit for that station rotation model, because you could really differentiate instruction within those teacher-led groups. And then you would have an opportunity to access a variety of learning opportunities. The students could focus on hands-on collaborative application, and you can get that real-time feedback in those small groups of students. Now, of course, some considerations you'll have to take in is that stamina component, especially with our little ones. If the students have not yet built up the stamina for independent work, it's going to be a little bit trickier to start this process. Not saying that it couldn't happen, but it would be a little bit trickier. Of course, we would have to address the tech issues, the behavioral issues of in person. What are students going to do if they finish early? How are we going to teach those routines and expectations, and what those materials and tools will look like for each group of learners? And so those are some considerations that you would have to have at the forefront. But once you kind of create those routines and those plans, that kind of sets up your entire system. And that way, the one thing you've got to focus on is then what are your rotations going to look like each day? Because you've already set up that structure of routines and expectations and stamina and tech and materials and tools at the forefront. And so this would be a good model for you if you preferred those multiple and varied learning opportunities. If you've really worked on your students with that independent capacity, this would be a good model for them. If you really want to find that time to meet with struggling students or those smaller groups, this is a really good model to look at to figure out how to meet with those students more often. And then though you have options for a variety of activities, and you can provide that synchronous and asynchronous work as well. So you kind of get that best of both worlds. And if you feel comfortable using multiple tech tools like Flipgrid or Seesaw, Google Classroom, the Google Suite tools, Pear Deck, if you feel comfortable using multiple tools, then you have a whole arsenal of materials that you can engage with your students to make station rotation models work.
Thanks, Maggie. So just take another moment before we continue on and jot down any notes in your note taker before we kind of close out with some resources and next steps. All right, and so towards the end of our presentation here, I just want to emphasize that point that Maggie just made, because it definitely stuck out to me, the idea of structure and routines. Whenever we go to this scenario, we are going to have to really focus on that and pretend like it's the beginning of the school year all over again. Because we know as teachers in a classroom, learning cannot happen until structures and routines are in place. So even though there are benefits and considerations for every one of these models, I'm confident that if you focus on the structure and the routine, you can make something work for your class. We have collected a variety of resources here as we've done research around this. So if you're interested in reading any more, these are some articles that you might start with on your journey there. We have hybrid resources specific to models, as well as some best practices. And then I want to give you some time to fill out this needs assessment. This is really, really helpful for us to know where you're at in your planning stage for you as a teacher, but also as a school site, so that we know where we can focus our efforts. If, for example, we have a ton of teachers choosing the station rotation model, then we can provide more support around that model and provide future trainings coming forward. So this is linked here if you'd like to click on it, and I'm sure somebody will drop it in the chat for me in just a moment as well. Oh, Kathy already did, of course. So if you'll take a moment and fill that out, we would really appreciate it. And I'm gonna keep talking for just a moment because I have a couple announcements, but please fill that out before you go today. At our April summit, we are having Bright Morning attend, and we're super excited about this. Elena Aguilar's company is called Bright Morning. She's the author of Coaching for Equity, the book you all received this year. So please look for information for that in Power School for April, so you can plan accordingly. And then please share this with your teachers. As Andrea mentioned at the beginning, this training will become available for all elementary teachers in the district beginning next week. So these are the times and dates that we have scheduled. You need to make sure that your teachers register for this in Power School because we have so many teachers in APS. We are going to be live streaming this session, which means they'll need to access the registration, or I'm sorry, the streaming link from Power School. And you might reinforce with them that that note taker is going to be really important because there will not be a chat feature in live stream. So they'll need to be able to access all of those resources from within the note taker. This flyer was in the Tuesday Times, so if your principal would like to share that out with your teachers so they can start planning ahead and register, that would be really great. Our contact info is here. Please also remember to take the survey in Power School. You should get that later this week for this session specifically. We are going to hang out here. This is meant to be a shorter session. This is the information that teachers will get next week. This is our first time presenting it, and we would love your honest feedback if you're willing to stick around and just chat with us so we can make modifications before next week. If you feel more comfortable sharing your feedback in the parking lot, that's perfectly okay too. But I'm gonna stop recording now and leave space for questions.